Catholics make up roughly 25% of our country. But if you look at all Christians, Christians make up something around 70% of our country. What would happen, I wonder, if today, every Catholic and every Christian resolved to live according to these evangelical counsels as I've described them? Back in the 1950s, the great Dorothy Day, the co-founder of the Catholic worker movement, expressed her dissatisfaction with a common distinction at the time, namely between a commandment spirituality that was appropriate to the laity and a council's spirituality appropriate to priests and religious. Now, what did that mean? It meant that, well, the laity are called to obey the 10 commandments, to do the basics of the moral and spiritual life. But it's the spiritual athletes, the priests and religious, who are called to a council spirituality, where they follow the evangelical counsels of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Of course, they follow the commandments. That was taken for granted. But they were seen as operating at a somewhat higher level. Well, Dorothy Day, back before the Vatican Council, expressed a dissatisfaction with this. She said, no, all the baptized are called to sanctity, to heroic sanctity, and so the laity, too, should follow the evangelical counsels. Now, Vatican II, I think it's fair to say, ratified Dorothy Day's perspective when it spoke of the universal call to holiness. Though laity and clergy realize these counsels in different ways, all the baptized are called to a high level of spiritual attainment. So I wanted to say a few simple things about this. What does it mean for the laity to follow not just the 10 commandments, of course, that's always taken for granted, but also to follow the evangelical counsels? We'll take poverty first. Now, very few lay people are called to the kind of poverty that, let's say, a Trappist monk is called to, or a Franciscan friar. That's a particular form, religious form of poverty. But all lay people, every baptized person is called to poverty in this sense of detachment from the goods of the world. I've often told you that Thomas Aquinas names these 4 great worldly goods: wealth, pleasure, honor, and power. Good in themselves, and we seek them naturally, but when we make them central to our lives, our spiritual lives become skewed. What happens is we become, in short order, addicted to these 4 things. And now our whole life is focused on getting wealth at all costs, getting pleasure, getting power, getting honor. Think of those priests of Baal in the Old Testament who are hopping around the altars, calling upon their gods. And of course, no fire comes because we don't find our ultimate happiness and satisfaction in these worldly things. And in fact, as they hop around the altar, they also wound themselves. That's a sign of the addictive power of getting attached to these things. And so every baptized person, every spiritually alert person, is called upon to become poor. That is to say, detached from these things so that they might do the will of God. Because sometimes God calls us on a path that means we will not be particularly powerful. We won't be particularly wealthy. We won't be honored. Think of the cross of Jesus. Well, every follower of Jesus, lay and clergy, lay and religious, is called to a detachment from these goods so they can follow the will of God. So obedience, or rather poverty first. Then chastity. Now, religious and priests are called to chastity in a very particular way, celibate chastity, and not everyone is called to celibacy, thank God, otherwise the human race would go out of existence pretty quickly. But all the baptized, all lay people, are called to chastity in this sense. To be chaste means to be sexually upright. It means to have a rightly ordered sexual life. And furthermore, that means a sexual life that is ordered to love, that's under the aegis of love. And again, following Aquinas, To love is to will the good of the other. Love is not a feeling, not a sentiment. Sentiments come and go. We can't really control them. But love, authentic love, is an act of the will. It's to will the good of the other. Do I live my sexual life in such a way that I am willing the good of the other all the time? Think now, everybody, of the church's insistence that sexuality is rightly expressed within marriage and ordered to the twin ends of unity and procreation. Now think about that for a second. What does that mean? It means that sexuality is now brought under the aegis of love in that double sense. Unity, love for one's spouse; procreation, love for one's children. You see, here's the thing. Sexuality, like our desire for food and drink, is a desire for life. Food and drink is to preserve my own life. Sex is to preserve the life of the species. Well, these life drives, Aquinas said, are the most powerful. And therefore, they are spiritually dangerous. You see what I mean? Because they're so powerful, they can force us to draw the world into ourselves. I will now do anything to achieve these ends. I will now do anything to satisfy my sexual desire. Well, the church says, no. This great evangelical counsel of chastity must be in place so that your sexual life is rightly ordered. So poverty, chastity, and finally obedience. Now again, there's a particularly clerical dimension of this. So when I was ordained a priest, I put my hands in the hands of Cardinal Bernardine, who ordained me, and I promised obedience to him and his successors. At the time, I barely knew him, much less his successor, who had a huge impact on my own life. I've, in that act, surrendered career and aspirations. I'm saying, no, look, my life belongs to you. I'll be obedient to you. Well, that's a clerical, religious form of obedience. But see, every baptized person is called to an analogous obedience. What do I mean? Well, obedire just means to listen in Latin, right? It means you listen to a higher voice. There's all kinds of voices around us that are calling us to, follow them. Do this, do that. Come after this good and that good. Fine. But then beyond those, there's the voice of God. The Bible might symbolize that as a physical voice coming from the clouds. Don't think of it literally, but it's a symbol of this higher summons, the summons to live a life in radical relationship to God. See, and that's obedience. What voice do I listen to finally? The voices of the world or to the higher voice of God? Everything will depend upon that. I say, especially to young lay people just beginning your careers, what voices are you going to follow? The highest voice, the voice of God, or these lower voices of the world? Everything else in your life will follow from that basic decision. To be obedient is to listen to that voice. Now, I want to close with this. Catholics make up roughly 25% of our country. But if you look at all Christians make up something around 70% of our country. What would happen, I wonder, if today, every Catholic and every Christian resolved to live according to these evangelical counsels as I've described them? What would happen if today every Christian said, I'm going to live in radical detachment from the goods of the world? Think of the missionary and evangelical energy that would be unleashed. What if today every Catholic, every Christian said, I'm going to live chastely. I'm going to have my sexual life ordered to love. What would happen to the pornography industry in our country? What would happen to human trafficking? What would happen to child sexual abuse? What would happen to so many marriages that are threatened by adultery, etc.? I mean, we'd revolutionize society overnight if every Christian resolved to live according to chastity. And what if today every lay person said, I'm going to live in obedience. I'm going to listen to the voice of God. I'm going to follow the promptings of what God wants me to do. Vatican II, everybody, spoke about the universal call to holiness. Why? For the sake of the world, so that the lay people, having been taught and sanctified by the clergy, could now go forth to Christify the world, to transform the world. Well, see, what Dorothy Day saw, what the Vatican II fathers intuited was, the way to do this is to embrace this council's spirituality: poverty, chastity, and obedience. If we all adopted those tonight, today, we'd change the world. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I invite you to share it and to subscribe to my YouTube channel.